This is Fusion Capitalism, a clean energy vision for conservatives. Brought to you by industry leader and company CEO, Steve Malink. Here's Steve.
This week I'm joined by Tom Fanning, the chairman, president, and CEO of Southern Company based in Atlanta and the U.S.'s second largest utility company. Southern serves 9 million customers, delivering electricity, natural gas, and solar energy. Tom, welcome to Fusion Capitalism.
Steve, great to be here.
Tom, let me start by asking what you'd say is the top story about Southern that should be known by people both inside and outside your service territory. And specifically, how are you and Southern leading in a way that is different from the average utility company in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's really pretty easy in some very obvious ways. This has been a company that has been focused on solutions, not rhetoric, for so long. And sometimes that's an advantage, and sometimes we need to get better. But when we think about the net zero energy future that we're all trying to transition to, Southern is the only company in America that has had the vision and courage, I suppose, to undertake new nuclear construction for the first generation of nuclear units in a generation of Americans. So it's been 40 years, really, since we brought one of these guys on. And that has been a heavy, heavy lift. So we're trying to invent the future of energy. The other thing that is completely different for us than it is for the rest of the industry is our commitment to innovation. We are the only company in our industry that has robust proprietary research and development. There's a R&D co-op across the industry called EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute. We're one of the top funders of that, and we are, I think, by far the largest partner with the Department of Energy on innovation and research there. Rather than just making, moving, and selling energy, we are committed to inventing the future of energy, and we are easily the most important company in that regard. There's been a whole lot about ESG written in corporate America here recently. If you dial way back to over 100 years ago, in the 19-teens, one of our presidents coined the phrase, "a citizen wherever we serve." We don't just say that as a bumper sticker proposition. We have been engaged in economic development, actually inventing and improving the market for electricity, even as we grew the industry. And now that manifests itself as one of the leaders in promoting racial equality. We just entered into a joint venture with Apple for something called the Propel Center, which will, for decades to come, provide critical mass for innovation and technology development for all of the HBCUs in America. Our foundations together have nearly $500 million. And I think even more important than the money is the people. We contribute volunteer hours. It is an expectation of everybody in our company to participate somehow, whether it's in your church, a little league team, or you name it. And I guess we do about 250,000 volunteer hours a year. So this idea that is rounded out by ESG is something that we've had in our DNA for, like I said, over 100 years. So if I just put those things together, I would say it is a terrific company, arguably the best franchise in the United States. But it is founded on the idea of developing real solutions, not just rhetoric. And it is grounded in the idea that the communities must be better off because we're there.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. Given my podcast is about highlighting the good work of clean energy leaders across the U.S., and Southern Company is recognized as one of those leaders in the utility industry, can you give us more of an overview of your plans to get to net zero carbon emissions?
Yeah, sure. You tell me whether it's going to be 2050 or 2035. It really represents an acceleration of this plan I'm about to tell you. And it will, depending on the year you choose, allow for technology innovation to really help ease the way and reduce the burden to our customers. So what does it look like for Southern to get from here to there? Before I took over as CEO of Southern, Southern generated about 70% of its energy from coal. And that's a big deal. In round numbers, this is a little dated and we're a little bit smaller, but just in your mind's eye, Southern is about the size of the nation of Australia in terms of energy production, okay? So to move from 70% to something else is a big deal. Last year, Southern reduced that 70% to around 17%.
Wow.
And we did it with minimal price increases to customers. Now, obviously, the beneficial use of natural gas has been a big help in that regard. So natural gas has gone from virtually nothing to about 50%. Renewables now penetrate up to, 12, 13%. Nuclear is about 16 to 20%. And there's a few other cats and dogs in there. But that's generally where we are. Where we will be is that renewables will grow to about 50%. And that's likely to be almost mostly solar. We have very little organic wind flows across the Southeast. So when we do wind energy, and we've got it here, we actually import it via long-haul transmission from Kansas and from Oklahoma. I actually don't like the idea of depending on long-haul transmission. So I think wind will be still an important part of the portfolio, but it'll be a little bit of a niche as well. The real design criteria is to locate the generation near the load center, not rely on transmission, and solar is the best animal for that. So think about 50% of our total generation coming from solar. The next piece will be nuclear. So we are finishing up this new nuclear investment we're making. We are working with folks like Bill Gates and others on solutions that we call Gen 4 reactors, that by their design, the likelihood of a meltdown is almost nil. And so therefore, they will become more economic because you'll need less of containment structure, et cetera. So we're working on that. I'll give you one more, SMRs, small modular reactors. Maybe, the military has nuclear reactors all over the place, whether it's an aircraft carrier, submarine, et cetera. There will be niche applications for that in the future. So nuclear will continue to be in importance. A great area of debate that I think there's a clear answer to, and I would love to take the opposite side of any debate in this regard, is the future of natural gas. We absolutely must, as a nation, to make ourselves competitive in a globally, competitive landscape for the economy, take advantage of plentiful, cheap natural gas. Now, it does emit carbon. And so one of the things that we have been a leader on in our research has been carbon capture and storage. So whether it's as an input, taking carbon out before we generate electricity, or taking carbon out after we generate electricity in the effluent streams from our processes, we'll be able to capture carbon from our gas generation. The last thing I would say is there will be some other applications like hydrogen, battery storage, pumped hydro, where you put a lake essentially on the top of a mountain and reap the benefits of hydro periodically during the day, generally during the peak seasons. One of the things that should be clear is, in this process, there will be some carbon emitted along the way. What we are also leading the United States on is net negative carbon strategies, whether that's direct capture from the air, or whether it is biomass, or whether it's a hybrid of biomass plus carbon capture sequestration. One of the guys on my board that I'm just really proud of and been friends with him for, I bet, 25 years is Dr. Ernie Moniz, former energy secretary. And you recall there's been a lot of debate about the Green New Deal, and he wrote a really famous paper that effectively reflects this blueprint that we've adopted. And it's called the Green Real Deal. When you add up all of these inputs, we think we can get to net zero by 2035 to 2050. To the extent you allow us a little more time, in other words, moving somewhere in the 40s, let's just say, then we have the ability to let technology innovation work for us. We're so capital intensive. In order to accomplish these big tasks, we require lots of lead time. The more time you give us, the more time we can let innovation work for the benefit of efficiency and cost, all for the benefit of our customers.
Very good. You know, the United Nations Climate Change Conference will be starting in Glasgow, Scotland. And as you know, the overwhelming scientific consensus is that we have through the end of this decade to stem the worst of climate change. So I'm heartened by what you say about your net zero carbon goals being earlier than 2050. In fact, that was going to be one of my other questions, that because the United Nations at large has committed to doing it by 2050, my thought is that, gosh, don't we need utilities, leaders especially, to get us to zero carbon before then, so that other weaker companies, utility companies, countries with low to moderate income can promise to get there by 2050. We need people who get there sooner than that to drag the rest of us there by 2050. But it sounds like you're kind of on that track.
Well, let's talk about the complexity of that. Our official posture is this little phrase, yes and. Can we do it by 2035? Yes. And along the way, there have to be some very important policy choices made by this government. You know, other things I do in my life outside of just kind of helping run Southern is the idea that energy is an important part of national security. And I've kind of branched out to represent broadly private industry in reimagining national security with the federal government, with our state-specific agent, with our federal sector-specific agencies, with the Department of Defense, U.S. Cyber Command, a variety of other things. You know, I'm effectively the only private citizen CEO on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. So I work with the National Security Council and CISA and all kinds of things in that regard. Okay, so let's put that one on the bookshelf. And then the book next to it will be the economy. I'm not doing it as much now, but I was on the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank board for 6 years. For 3 years, I chaired that bank. And all of the different sectors of the Fed come together, and I chaired the advisory board to the big Fed. I was there during the time, I was chair during the time that we moved from Janet Yellen to Jay Powell, for example, and I remained friends with them. So let's put this idea of the economy next to this idea of national security. And now let's put next to it energy policy and climate policy. The idea of the union of those sets is the idea that we must have balance in whatever we do. We can't let just a fervor to achieve zero carbon emissions by whatever date we choose drive all of our decision making. We must make sure that we provide to the United States energy policy that is clean, zero carbon in this case, safe in terms of national security, reliable, and in fact now, not just reliable, but resilient, and I'll cover that later if you want, and affordable. The United States has such blessings of energy capacity and at a price that beats the pants off of anybody else around the world virtually, that it is an important arrow in our quiver of economic policy in order to drive our economy forward relative to China, relative to Europe, relative to almost anybody you name. What we have to do is make sometimes those competing objectives work together. And I must say, I am convicted to the notion that it is not an or, it is an and. And we've got to find ways to make all of this make sense in a balanced way.
That brings me to a YouTube video I saw of you speaking on national energy policy, where you do emphasize we need to provide electricity that is clean, safe, reliable, and affordable. And I'm just wondering that you kind of suggested, at least at that time, that, energy policy so often focuses on the clean portion, but not on the other portions, safe, reliable, and affordable. But I wonder if that narrative is changing over time now that we see that solar and wind is safe compared to many of the alternatives, that it is affordable compared to many of the alternatives, and that by themselves, solar and wind is not reliable because of its intermittency, granted. But, can that be addressed with battery storage now that this technology is going mainstream?
Yeah, but okay, so we're as big as the nation of Australia, round numbers. I was just on Squawk Box and kind of went through this material. Solar will be the answer for us. Interestingly, Southern Company are companies largely, except for the ones in Illinois and Virginia, but we have turned into winter peakers. And it's fascinating. If solar is going to generate about half of our electricity in the Southeast, what do we do on that winter peaking day, which peaks at about 7 a.m. in the morning, where you have a cold snap and everybody starts turning on strip heat? Solar will contribute little or nothing. And as you point out, one of the answers to that will be storage, okay? Now, if in your mind's eye is this kind of large-scale storage, and let's say it's the size of, these container structures that are on these ships and everything else, that's kind of what you get, and what you do is string them together. And let's say the best answer for that right now is lithium-ion technology, kind of the Elon Musk approach to energy storage. The scale of what you're going to have to do in terms of energy storage is enormous. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the amount of lithium in existence, the fact that a lot of it is owned by China, the fact that it's just too big to rely on storage. That's why I am convicted that intermittent combating technologies like combustion turbines with carbon capture are something that we can deploy and have in place that will keep our energy security where it should be. But let's think about more risks there. What about the risk of pipelines going down and the risks of bad actors in the global community coming after the energy complex in America and making us vulnerable? We really do need to rethink, reimagine how the private sector will lean in on government and create energy choices that are secure and reliable. And I think now I need to bring up the idea of resilient. Mm-hmm. There are two kinds of energy markets in the United States. And I'm going to be kind of broad brush here. But one is what we live in. It's called an integrated, regulated market, where responsibility and accountability for making, moving, and selling energy resides in one area, and it is governed by one regulatory body, in this case, state public service commissions. The other half of the United States has different flavors, but I will call out the state of Texas and their energy-only market and look at the problems of Winter Storm Uri. It is fundamentally an incorrect choice. It is a failed science experiment to pursue these kinds of markets in increasingly volatile circumstances. They have disaggregated the responsibility for generating electricity, and it's disaggregated from moving electricity, and it is disaggregated from ultimate delivery of electricity. Oh, and then you have the corresponding complexity of energy delivery into the process, i.e. gas pipelines are also separate. And so what you must do is figure out a way to think about a changed obligation of the industry. If you believe that, in fact, the climate is changing and the tail outcomes of weather, for example, are getting more extreme, fatter tails, if you will, then circumstances like Winter Storm Uri are going to happen more and more frequently. If this 100-year-old obligation of the industry is reliability, that is how your system may operate under normal conditions, how do we think about abnormal conditions? And this really gets into the problem of resilience. That is, when things go wrong, when the stuff hits the fan, how can we assure America and its citizens that electricity will be there? It is the backbone of our economy. And if we have a disruption, how short can we make the disruption? Whether it's a winter storm or a tornado or a hurricane or a cyber attack. These are all interesting ideas that we've been working on with great fervor.
Okay, very interesting. Hang on, Tom. We have to take a break, but coming up in the second part of my conversation with Tom Fanning, the chairman, president, and CEO of Southern Company, Tom shares how Southern has been on the forefront of innovation while putting their customers first.
Our biggest subsidiary, Georgia Power Company, was named by the solar industry itself the top investor-owned utility in the solar space idea. We've never had a requirement to hit a goal. We hit goals because they made sense for customers, and we move quickly in that regard.
Thanks for listening to Fusion Capitalism. To find out more about Steve Malink and his book, go to fusioncapitalism.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.